He left the gala in silence, coat over his shoulder, walking past the glow of a night market. Then, tiny fingers tugged his sleeve. A barefoot girl, no older than 6, looked up and whispered, "Can you hug me? Like your daughter?" She didn't know who he was, but in that one question, everything he'd buried came rushing back. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. The wind curled through downtown Austin like a whispered reminder that even this city, drenched in light and sound, could go quiet when it wanted to. Ethan Reynolds stood outside the gala hall, the gold-plated Innovation Award heavy in his hand, colder in his heart. Cameras had flashed, hands had clapped, people had toasted his success, but none of it stayed with him. Not the praise, not the music, not even the woman who'd clung to his arm for a photograph and vanished for another glass of champagne. He had slipped out unnoticed, just like he always did. That was the thing about building walls. People stopped trying to climb over them. His footsteps clicked against the damp pavement as he wandered, untethered, past holiday-lit storefronts and vendor stalls. The December air bit through his tailored suit, but he didn't mind. Pain was at least proof he was still alive. A nearby jazz band played "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and Ethan turned toward the glow of the night market. Rows of handmade crafts, street food, and twinkling lights spilled across the plaza like warmth drawn in crayon. He stopped at a modest booth tucked beneath a crooked string of bulbs, wooden ornaments, beaded earrings, watercolor postcards. Behind the table stood a woman with tired eyes and quiet strength. She wore a faded gray sweater and had dark curls pulled into a loose bun. She was arranging a tray of hand-painted pins when it happened, a small tug at his side. Ethan looked down and met a pair of wide, wondering eyes. "Can you hug me like your daughter?" the little girl asked, softly but clearly. He froze. She couldn't have been more than 5. Messy brown curls framed her face, and a stuffed penguin peeked from her backpack. She looked at him as if he were someone she almost recognized, someone worth trusting. Ethan blinked, stunned, silent. He didn't have a daughter, never had, never thought he wanted one. But in that moment, something inside his chest cracked open. Her voice had struck a nerve, a memory buried deep beneath years of logic and ambition. His sister, Lila, thin and pale in a hospital bed, had once whispered something not so different. "I wish you'd stayed longer," she had said the night before she died. He hadn't. He had a test the next morning, a meeting, a life already being built brick by brick. The girl reached for him again, unafraid. "It's okay. You looked like someone who needed a hug, too." Just then, a woman's voice called out, frantic but hushed. "Lily, I told you to stay by the table." The vendor, now rushing from behind the booth, knelt and gently pulled the girl close. "I'm so sorry," she said to Ethan, her voice both defensive and apologetic. She's always friendly. Too friendly." Lily beamed up at her mother. "He didn't get mad. He's nice." Ethan knelt slowly, his legs stiff, unsure why he was even doing it. "Hi," he said, meeting Lily's eyes. "Thank you. For the hug." His voice was hoarse, uneven. Lily giggled, then wrapped her small arms around his neck. For a man known for robotic efficiency and emotional distance, Ethan felt completely unprepared for the warmth that hit him like sun through ice. It wasn't just a hug, it was a reminder of softness, of loss, of something he'd long told himself he didn't need. "I'm Maya," the woman offered hesitantly, once her daughter released him. "And this is Lily. Again, I'm sorry. She doesn't always know boundaries." "It's okay," Ethan said, standing. "Neither do I." Maya gave him a polite, reserved smile, the kind of expression that had walls built behind it. She looked tired, but dignified. Her hands were paint-stained and worn, her sweater patched at the elbow, a woman surviving more than she let on. "Well, Merry Christmas," she added, gathering Lily's small hand into hers. "Merry Christmas," Ethan replied, watching as they walked back toward the booth. Lily turned once more and waved. "You can come back," she said. "Next time, I'll draw you a penguin." And just like that, they were gone, folded back into the lights and the music and the scent of cinnamon in the air. But the warmth of her small arms, the quiet certainty in her voice, they stayed. Ethan stood there for several minutes after they left, the night moving around him like he wasn't part of it anymore. In his hand, the award still gleamed, a symbol of everything he'd built. But in his chest, for the first time in years, something unfamiliar stirred. He didn't have a name for it. Not yet. But it started with a hug. The morning after the market, the penthouse felt even colder than usual. Ethan stood in his kitchen, nursing a coffee he didn't want, staring out the window at the frost settling on downtown Austin. The skyline gleamed like a monument to ambition. It usually soothed him, but today it felt indifferent. He should have been thinking about the Reynolds Dynamics Q1 rollout or the European client he was flying to meet next week, but his mind refused to cooperate. Instead, it kept circling back to the little girl in the red backpack, to the warmth of her hug, to the softness in her voice when she'd said, "You looked like someone who needed a hug too." No child should have that kind of emotional radar, and yet Lily had it in spades. He leaned on the countertop and picked up his phone. He hesitated, then sent a message to his executive assistant, Nora. Discreet inquiry. Any info on a Maya Bennett? Street vendor at last night's downtown market. No contact, just background check. Nora didn't ask questions. Within 2 hours, he had a file. Maya Bennett, 31. Former public school art teacher. Partner deceased during the 2020 pandemic. No criminal record, no lawsuits, no red flags. Just steady, quiet hardship. She lived with her daughter in a small upper-unit rental above an independent bookstore in East Austin. No car, 2 part-time jobs. Income below the poverty line. Ethan scrolled through the details and felt a knot tighten in his chest. For a woman holding her life together with scraps, she had carried herself with pride. He closed the file and stared out at the city again. A city where someone like him could vanish into penthouses and private jets, while someone like Maya barely scraped by, yet still offered warmth, grace, and dignity. He didn't know what he was trying to prove by going back to the market. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That evening, he returned. Gone was the sleek, tailored suit. He wore jeans, boots, and a charcoal wool coat. He told himself it was to blend in, to avoid recognition. But really, it was because he didn't want to show up as the man who collected awards. He wanted to show up as the man who hadn't stopped thinking about a little girl's hug. The market bustled again under the winter lights. Laughter, jazz, and the scent of roasted chestnuts filled the air. When he spotted the booth, his breath caught. There she was, Maya, arranging her crafts with careful precision. And next to her, Lily, in a mismatched coat and glittery boots, coloring something on the back of a receipt with a stubby blue crayon. Lily looked up and spotted him. "It's the hug man," she squealed, waving. Maya turned sharply, instantly guarded. Her expression was cool, neutral. "Evening," she said carefully. "Evening," Ethan replied. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here." "We usually are," she said, then glanced down. "Lily, manners," Lily beamed. "Hi again." Ethan stepped forward and picked up a pair of earrings carved from tiny pieces of stained glass. "Did you make these?" "I did," Maya said, wariness still in her tone. He set down the earrings, then gently picked up a bracelet made of paper beads sealed in resin. "This one too?" "Everything on this table is handmade," she replied. He reached for his wallet and placed 2 crisp bills down, double what the bracelet was priced at. "We're not a charity booth," she said evenly. He didn't flinch. "Then you've severely underpriced your talent." She blinked, surprised. For a split second, something in her eyes softened, but then she nodded and slipped the bracelet into a small paper bag. Lily tugged on his coat. "Did you come back for another hug?" Ethan chuckled. "Not tonight. I came back to see the art." Lily leaned close and whispered loudly, "Mommy doesn't sell hugs, but sometimes I give them away for free." Maya's cheeks flushed, and she shook her head with a weary sort of affection. "Lily." "What?" Lily pouted. "He's nice. You said we should be kind." "I said we should be cautious." Ethan stayed a moment longer, then offered a gentle nod. "It was nice seeing you both again." Maya gave a tight smile. "You too." As he walked away, he heard Lily whisper, "Mommy, maybe he's the someone." Maya didn't answer. Ethan didn't turn around, but her words followed him home. That night, in his penthouse lit by recessed lights and surrounded by silence, he set the bracelet on his dresser and lay on his bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. He had everything: a global company, a dozen awards, a reputation most men envied. But tonight, all he could think about was a paper bead bracelet and the look in a child's eyes when she said he looked like someone who needed a hug. He didn't know what this was yet: curiosity, guilt, compassion. But one thing was clear: he wasn't done with Maya and Lily, not even close. The next night, Ethan returned to the market, but this time he wasn't wearing his tailored navy blazer or his sleek Oxfords polished to a mirror sheen. Instead, he showed up in a charcoal wool coat, jeans, and the simplest gray sweater he owned. No one recognized him, which was exactly what he wanted. Tonight, he wasn't a CEO, a strategist, or the face of a multi-million-dollar brand. He was just a man, following something that tugged harder than logic: the echo of a small voice asking for a hug. Maya saw him approaching and instinctively straightened her display. Her walls were still up, but her curiosity flickered. She didn't greet him, only nodded. Lily, on the other hand, lit up like a string of fairy lights. "It's the hug man," she squealed, bouncing in place beside her mother's table. Ethan smiled, crouching beside her. "I was hoping you'd be here," he said, offering a small wrapped parcel. Lily blinked, intrigued, then tore it open to find a brand new sketchbook with a soft blue cover and the words written in silver, "For someone who sees the world in colors." "Did you get this for me?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. Ethan shrugged, feigning mystery. "Let's just say it came from someone who thinks your art is pretty special." Maya eyed the gift warily but said nothing. He'd chosen something thoughtful, not flashy. For a moment, she didn't stop him. Business was slow that evening, the cold air making most shoppers rush past the booths. As the crowds thinned, Ethan stayed, not hovering, not speaking too much, just close enough to feel present. When Maya began packing up, she turned and noticed him still standing there. "We usually grab tacos after the market," she said, half a statement, half an invitation. Ethan smiled. "Mind if I tag along?" They sat on a bench under a rusted metal awning, Lily between them with her backpack on her knees and Pip the penguin in her lap. Maya handed out foil-wrapped tacos, still steaming, while Lily used her new sketchbook as a table. With each bite, laughter spilled between bites and sketches. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Lily began drawing quickly, tongue poking out in concentration. When she was finished, she turned the page around and showed it to Ethan. It was a simple drawing: 3 stick figures under a big green tree. One was tall, with dark hair. One had wavy lines for long curls. The smallest figure held hands with both. Above it, in big pink crayon letters, it read, "Someday." Ethan stared at the picture longer than he meant to. Something cracked in his chest, quiet but deep. He folded the paper carefully and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. "I'll keep this safe," he said. That night, back in his penthouse, he didn't turn on the lights. He stood by the window holding the drawing, city lights flickering behind the glass. For once, he didn't feel invincible or unreachable. He felt like a man who had touched something more honest than anything success had ever offered him. Over the next few days, he kept returning to the market, not out of obligation, but something closer to need. Each night, he came with less armor. No more titles, no more schedules, just tacos, sketchbooks, soft-spoken questions, and moments that required no explanation. Sometimes, he and Maya barely spoke. She would be arranging bracelets while he quietly helped sort prices or kept Lily entertained. Other nights, Lily would read her drawings out loud as if they were stories, narrating adventures of Pip the penguin sailing a sea made of soup or building a house out of music. Maya never thanked Ethan directly for the continued kindness, but her shoulders relaxed more with each visit. She began to joke lightly with him. She handed him an extra taco without asking if he was staying. One evening, she even smiled as she told him, "She's calling you Mr. Someday now. That's a big promotion from Hug Man." He laughed softly. "I'll take it." By the time the 3rd week rolled around, Ethan found himself rearranging his schedule. not out of guilt, but because he wanted to be there. When Maya got a flat tire, he was the one who noticed and quietly had it replaced. When Lily got nervous about her drawings, he asked her if Pip would let him borrow one for his desk, and when he left each night, he did so slowly, reluctantly, as though walking away from that folding table and mismatched bins meant stepping back into a life he wasn't sure he wanted anymore. One night, Maya caught him staring not at her, but at the glow from a lantern above their table. She tilted her head. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Ethan thought about it. "Not always, just when I don't want to ruin something by speaking too fast." She nodded, looking at him longer than before. Then she whispered, "Sometimes silence says more." That night, when he got home, he pulled Lily's drawing from his pocket and pinned it on the inside of his closet door, right above his starched shirts and ties. Every morning after, he saw the word "someday" before anything else. It was the kind of Saturday morning that should have felt like magic. The art show was held in a modest community center just south of the river, decked out in handmade garlands, string lights, and watercolor name tags. Maya hadn't planned to come, but Mrs. Ross had gently insisted, mentioning nothing more than, "You'll want to see it." She walked in with Lily's hand in hers, her worn canvas tote slung over one shoulder, and her heart tucked behind layers of guarded hope. The smell of finger paint and warm cider filled the air. Children ran about in mismatched socks, parents held phones like paparazzi, and music from a volunteer pianist drifted from a far corner. It all felt light, like something Maya used to dream about. Then she saw it, a display near the back wall labeled "Drawn from the Heart." Lily's crayon pieces were featured prominently: a stick figure family holding hands under a rainbow, a smiling penguin flying with balloons, and another titled "My Mommy's Laugh," a burst of scribbled yellow lines beaming out from a lopsided sun. Maya blinked, then blinked again. "Mommy, look, that's mine!" Lily exclaimed, running toward the drawings with unfiltered glee. "They put Pip next to it." Sure enough, Pip the penguin, stuffed, stitched, and noble, sat proudly beside her name tag. Maya's chest squeezed, not from pain, but something more dangerous, long-dormant pride. That's when she spotted him. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, not in a suit this time, but in a navy sweater and gray slacks. His arms were crossed casually, but his eyes gave him away. They weren't on her, they were on Lily, wide and warm in a way she hadn't seen since ever. She approached slowly, unsure of what to say, but he didn't speak first. Instead, he gestured to the wall and said simply, "She's gifted." I wanted others to see that. It wasn't a grand moment, but it was honest, and for once, Maya didn't pull away. She stood beside him in silence, watching her daughter glow in a sea of color and acceptance. Something in her softened, if only for a second, but life doesn't let soft things last long. 3 days later, Maya was stocking shelves at the bookstore when she heard a voice in the back office, Ethan's assistant. Mrs. Ross had stepped out, and the door was cracked. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds is still funding the Bennett Trust. No, she doesn't know it's him. Yes, the clinic bills too. We made sure it looked like it came from a local fund." Maya froze. Her fingers curled around the spine of a book until her knuckles turned white. Trust, clinic bills, supplies, the gifts, the sketchbooks, the show. Her face flushed, not with gratitude, but humiliation. It wasn't kindness. It was management. It was strategy. Later that evening, Ethan returned to the market, expecting another warm smile, or maybe one of Lily's chaotic high fives. Instead, he found Maya standing behind her table, arms crossed tight, expression unreadable. "You should have told me," she said without preamble. Ethan blinked. "Told you what?" "That it was you, the art supplies, the clinic, the anonymous fund, all of it." He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "You didn't help us. You managed us. Like one of your quarterly investments. Maya, that's not—" "You made me feel human," she continued, voice tightening. "Then reminded me I wasn't. Just a profile on your desk." Her words landed with surgical precision. Ethan stood there, silent, the distance between them suddenly heavier than it had ever been. Maya began packing up her crafts. We're not some broken project you fix to feel better. Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. Is Mr. Ethan leaving again? Ethan finally found his voice. I never meant to hurt you. Maya didn't reply. She lifted Lily into her arms, her eyes unreadable. But Lily turned over her shoulder and looked at him. Her little voice was quieter than usual. He tried. I think he meant the hug. That sentence echoed in Ethan's chest long after they disappeared into the crowd. The penthouse stood silent, high above the shimmering lights of downtown Austin. The walls, once symbols of prestige and precision, now echoed only the absence of purpose. Ethan stepped inside, his shoes clicking faintly on the marble floors. He set his keys down without thought, peeled off his coat, and walked through the polished expanse of glass, steel, and curated emptiness. Everything gleamed. The chandelier above the entryway sparkled like a museum piece. The wine rack showcased bottles that had aged untouched, and the view beyond the windows spread out like a canvas of a life lived at a distance. But inside, it was silent. Hollow. Ethan moved to his office, where a long oak desk sat with military order. Without turning on the lights, he opened the top drawer and pulled out Lily's drawing, the one she'd given him weeks ago. The colors were uneven, the lines imperfect, but there they were, 3 stick figures holding hands under a tree, smiling. One word floated above them in crayon: someday. He sat down, elbows resting on the cool surface, eyes fixed on the paper. His chest tightened. Not the sharp sting of loss, but the dull, pulsing ache of emptiness. The kind that no title, no revenue report, no Forbes cover could ever mask. He tried to work, to distract himself with metrics, strategy briefs, expansion projections. But every spreadsheet blurred, every data point felt meaningless. His hands, always steady, now trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Dozens of missed calls, board members, legal teams, media inquiries. He turned it over and powered it off. None of it mattered, not tonight. As the city blinked and moved below, Ethan sat motionless, the room around him dark, except for the faint golden glow from the streetlights outside. Eventually, he stood, took Lily's drawing, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his blazer. He didn't know why his feet led him to the east side, but they did. The streets grew narrower, older. He passed the shuttered windows of a taco stand, the hum of a laundromat still spinning behind barred windows, and finally arrived at the faded front of Mrs. Ross's bookstore. The closed sign hung crookedly in the window, but a single lamp glowed inside. He knocked softly. After a pause, the door creaked open. Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Ross said, eyebrows arched. Didn't expect to see you tonight. I didn't expect to be here, he replied truthfully. His voice felt low, strained. She stepped aside, letting him in. The scent of aged paper and peppermint tea filled the cozy space. He noticed the front table was bare, where Maya's crafts used to sit. I assume you're not here for first editions, she said, already reaching behind the counter. From a drawer, she pulled out a small envelope. She left this for you. Said if you ever showed up, I'd know what to do. He stared at the envelope in her hand, unsure if he wanted to open it. She didn't say much, Mrs. Ross added, but her eyes looked like someone trying to leave something unsaid for too long. Ethan took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a single note, written in the same flowing script he'd seen on the back of Lily's sketchbook. Some people love quietly. That doesn't mean they don't hurt loudly. Thank you for seeing us, even when we weren't ready to be seen. There were no accusations, no demands, just a truth that wrapped around his ribs and pressed into every part of him that had gone numb years ago. He closed the note slowly, folded it with care, and tucked it beside Lily's drawing in his pocket. Outside the bookstore, the wind had calmed, and the sidewalks glistened faintly from an earlier drizzle. As he stepped out, something caught his eye. Just beneath the front window, drawn in fading chalk, was a child's sketch. 3 figures beneath a crooked sun. Above it, the words, "Hope lives here." Ethan knelt beside it, ran his fingers gently over the dusty lines, then sat on the stoop, elbows on his knees, staring into the night. Still does, he whispered, and for the first time in years, he felt not powerful, not successful, but real. achingly, tenderly real. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. Not now, not ever again. The storm that rolled through Austin that night didn't ask permission. It arrived with a vengeance. Howling winds, sideways rain, streets flooded in minutes. But Ethan barely noticed the weather as he sat motionless in his penthouse, staring at the drawing still resting on his desk. Someday. That one word now felt like a weight on his chest. The glass walls around him shimmered with reflections of lightning, but inside, all was still. He hadn't spoken to anyone all day. He hadn't eaten either. His phone was somewhere on the floor, silenced since the morning. He knew the silence was his choice, but it didn't feel like control anymore. It felt like punishment. Driven by something he didn't quite understand, Ethan found himself behind the wheel of his black SUV, wipers smearing rain in fast swipes across the windshield. He wasn't heading anywhere specific until he saw them. Outside a community health clinic in East Austin, a group of people huddled under a narrow awning, soaked and miserable. And there, through the fogged-up glass of the truck window, he saw her, Maya, drenched, clutching a shivering Lily in her lap. Her jacket was soaked through, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Lily's eyes were glassy, her skin pale under the weak glow of the clinic sign. She whimpered softly, head buried in Pip, the penguin's fuzzy body. Ethan didn't think. He parked the car haphazardly by the curb and jumped out, ignoring the cold splash of water in his shoes. "Maya!" he shouted over the wind. She looked up, startled, holding Lily tighter. "What are you—" "She's burning up," he said, already stepping closer. Maya hesitated for half a second. Then Lily coughed, a deep, aching sound, and her grip around Pip loosened. Ethan didn't wait for permission. He reached out, scooping the small child into his arms with practiced care, his suit jacket wrapping around her like a shield. Maya followed without a word, breath ragged, eyes tracking every step. They reached the ER in minutes. Ethan didn't flinch at the check-in desk. His name alone cleared the line. A private room, a pediatric nurse, warm blankets, the best fever medication money could buy. But Ethan didn't leave. While Maya sat beside the hospital bed, exhausted and tense, Ethan took off his damp coat, rolled up his sleeves, and noticed Pip lying on the floor, his left wing nearly torn off at the seam. Without a word, Ethan pulled a needle and thread from the small emergency kit his assistant insisted he always carry. He took the little stuffed penguin, laid him on his lap, and began to stitch. Maya watched from the corner of the room. She didn't speak, but something shifted in her chest as she saw the man who once made her feel like a line item on a spreadsheet, now threading stitches into a child's toy with hands that trembled. When Lily finally fell asleep, her breathing shallow but steady, Maya crossed the room and sat in the second chair. The room buzzed with soft fluorescent hums, and outside the window, the storm had begun to slow. "You didn't have to come back," she said finally. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes tired but clear. "I did." Maya looked down at her lap. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded crayon drawing, creased, a little smudged from water. "Because walking away from you, from her, felt worse than anything I've ever lost." Maya looked at the paper, the 3 stick figures beneath the tree, the word "someday" drawn in red crayon. Her throat tightened. "I don't know how to trust people who leave," she said. "It's not bitterness. It's just history." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "My sister died when I was 15. I was supposed to be with her that night, but I stayed late working on a science project. I thought I had time. I always thought I had time." Maya glanced at him. "I never forgave myself," he continued, "so I built walls. Career, logic, control. It worked, until her." He nodded toward the sleeping Lily, whose fingers clutched Pip with the same tenderness they had the night they met. Maya's voice was soft now. "I lost my partner in the first wave of COVID. He had asthma, and they didn't have enough ventilators. They told me to prepare for the worst. I didn't even know how to tell Lily he was gone." They sat there in silence, 2 people surrounded by soft beeps and dim lights, and the weight of everything they'd never shared before. I'm not asking you to forget, Ethan said. I'm not even asking you to forgive. But I'm here, still, and I don't want to run from that anymore. Maya studied him for a long moment. Then she leaned back in the chair, her posture easing just slightly. I don't know if I can trust you yet, she said. That's okay, he replied. I'll earn it, one stitch at a time. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Inside, Lily stirred in her sleep, cheeks pink with returning warmth. Maya pulled the blanket higher over her daughter and whispered, Thank you. Ethan didn't respond. He just stayed. The late March air in Austin held the last kiss of winter, but the golden haze of dusk promised spring. Outside the Eastwood Community Center, colorful string lights danced across the sidewalks, and laughter poured from the tall windows like music notes set free. Inside, rows of easels lined the walls, each one displaying a child's drawing, some crayon bright, others messy and joyful. The banner stretched across the far wall read in looping childlike letters, crayons of hope, a night of color, courage, and second chances. Maya stood across the street, holding Lily's hand a little too tightly. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pinned back in soft curls, but her eyes darted toward the glowing windows like a deer spotting headlights. She hadn't meant to come, not really. She'd sat at the edge of her bed for an hour after Ethan's invitation arrived, rereading the note in his clipped but strangely hopeful handwriting. No expectations, just an evening to honor Lily, and maybe quietly you too. Mrs. Ross had been the tipping point. You've taught Lily how to stand tall, she'd said earlier that week at the bookstore, adjusting a stack of worn poetry volumes. Let her see what it looks like when her mother walks forward, not away. So here they were. Lily, beaming in a handmade dress dotted with painted butterflies, held Pip in one hand and Maya's trembling fingers in the other. Inside, the place buzzed with families and local artists, neighbors and reporters. Maya hadn't seen this many people since before the world fell apart. It should have made her dizzy. Instead, her eyes found the wall of children's drawings, and there in the center, framed in soft light, hung lilies. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small. Pip at their feet, above their heads, in red crayon, I found my hug. Maya's breath caught. She didn't realize Ethan was watching until she heard his voice behind her. She insisted it be in the middle, said it was where hugs belonged, between people. He stood in his dark blazer, no tie, shirt slightly wrinkled like he'd fought through something just to get here. His eyes held more warmth than polish tonight. Maya turned slowly. You really went through with this. I did, he said quietly. Because of her, and because of you. She let Lily rush ahead toward the cookie table, where volunteers handed out juice boxes and little pinwheels. Then she faced him fully. We're not a chapter in your redemption speech, Ethan. I know. We're not a showcase for good PR. You're not. And I'm not one of your projects. He hesitated, then said, You never were. The silence between them stretched, not awkward, but pregnant with possibility. A cello played gently from the stage, underscoring the emotion neither of them had named yet. Your speech, Maya said, glancing toward the podium, shorter than I expected. He gave a half smile. Only thing I ever said that didn't need editing. She crossed her arms. Best investment I ever made wasn't a company. It was a second chance. That part? He nodded. It was always you. Something flickered in her eyes. Not forgiveness yet, but maybe belief. Do you know what Lily said to me yesterday? She asked. Ethan shook his head. She said, if Mr. Ethan had a family, I think he'd stop building towers and start building dinners. He laughed, a real one, full of something unpracticed and bright. She might be onto something. Maya didn't smile right away, but then slowly she did. A small, tired smile. The kind that came not from giddiness, but from surrendering a burden she didn't need to carry alone anymore. I don't know what this is, she said. It doesn't have to be anything yet, he replied, but I'm not walking away this time. Not from her, not from you. Even if we're messy? Especially if you're messy. She stared at him for a beat longer, then reached into her purse. She pulled out a folded paper and handed it to him. It was a new drawing, the same three figures under a tree, but now a dinner table was between them. On it sat Pip, a bowl of spaghetti, and 3 plates. Caption, "Someday, today." He looked up, eyes suddenly glassy. "We're not a charity," Maya whispered. He met her gaze. "Number. But maybe we're a story still being written." She didn't respond in words, just reached for his hand, and for the first time, Ethan didn't let go. The cottage wasn't much by design. It didn't boast floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble, or sleek chrome accents. But in its humble creaking floors and paint-chipped window frames, it had something Ethan had never found in all his glass and concrete empires. Warmth. Real warmth. The kind that lingered long after the lights were off and the dishes were stacked. The kind that came with laughter, mismatched furniture, and a 5-year-old singing off-key in the kitchen. It was a Friday evening, Family Friday, as Lily called it, with uncontainable joy, and the cottage buzzed with the chaotic charm of people who were still learning how to belong to each other. In the kitchen, Maya was half laughing, half scolding, as smoke curled up from the oven. The lasagna, once promising, now wore a crisp layer of regret. She opened the window with one hand, while waving a dish towel with the other. "Well," she said, mock dramatic, "who needs edible food when there's love, right?" Ethan chuckled from the living room, where he was untangling holiday lights that had somehow ended up in the autumn storage box. "I think we've established that no one here married me for my cooking, or my organizational skills." "Married," Maya teased, raising an eyebrow. Ethan flushed slightly. "Metaphorically," he said, clearing his throat. "Figuratively. Hypothetically, Lily ran in just then, her dress inside out and glitter stickers stuck to both her cheeks. She held a crayon drawing triumphantly in her hand. Look what I made for the dinner wall." The drawing was simple, 3 stick figures holding hands under a tree with orange leaves. Above them, in Lily's lopsided handwriting, was one word: today. She handed it to Ethan with pride. He glanced at the wall above the dining table where another drawing, now framed in oak, hung reverently. The first one Lily had ever given him, the one with the word someday. Side by side, the 2 pictures told the story of everything they had been and everything they had become. Dinner, though charred, was served with paper napkins and juice boxes, and candlelight from stubby tea candles that Maya insisted made things cozy, not cheap. The table was covered in a plaid cloth from Mrs. Ross's bookstore and held together by a sugar dispenser wedged under one uneven leg. Pip the stuffed penguin, now stitched in 3 different colors, sat proudly in his own chair, complete with a folded napkin and a tiny plate with imaginary spaghetti. They talked about everything and nothing. Lily asked 100 questions, some about stars, others about dogs, one about what it meant to be tax deductible. Maya recounted a story from work about a customer who tried to pay for bookmarks with marbles. Ethan, for once, didn't talk about numbers, markets, or deadlines. He just laughed, and listened, and looked across the table like it was the most important boardroom he'd ever sat in. Later, as Maya washed dishes and Lily hummed a made-up lullaby to Pip, Ethan knelt beside Lily's chair. The flicker of the candle caught the edges of her drawing. "You once asked me for a hug," he said softly, his voice steady but low. "And you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. But I never asked what you needed from me." Lily looked up at him, blinking. "So," Ethan continued, placing a hand on her small one, "can I still earn that title? Dad?" She didn't pause, didn't hesitate. She launched herself into his arms like a comet into orbit. "Yes, you already did," she whispered, arms tight around his neck. Across the room, Maya watched them, her eyes warm and wet, her hands still dripping from the sink. Ethan reached across, hand open. Maya walked to him, took it. "I'm still scared sometimes," she murmured. "So am I," he replied, squeezing gently. "But we're here, together." Outside, the stars began to prick through the inky sky. Inside, the laughter returned, soft at first, then blooming like spring after a long gray season. They cleared the table, put Lily to bed with Pip tucked under her arm, and returned to the living room where a single lamp glowed gold. Ethan stared once more at the drawings on the wall. Someday, and today. He smiled. This noisy, imperfect, beautiful life was no longer just a hope drawn in crayon. It was real, it was now, and it was his.